Hello, welcome back to the Queen City Guitar Shop. So as you may have seen in my last video, I put out a call for people to give me their ideas for videos they'd like to see covered in the future, topics that they're interested in. And the first one I got was sort of a cataloging of tools that I use and find essential to the job. I'm getting ready to sharpen, so it seemed like a good time to make this video as I'm going to be pulling a bunch of tools out for that. So yeah, we're going to do that today. I will say that I'm going to focus on tools that relate to the processes I use to build guitars. As we get further out from that process, from what I do myself, I'm going to know less and less about what you're going to really need. But I will say, having worked in a fully equipped modern shop with modern working machines, a lot of the hand tools that I use are still going to be really helpful and essential for guitar building, even if you're using a ton of modern machines. And so even if you're not building in exactly the style that I am, this still might be an interesting and useful topic to learn a little bit about my process. Starting off today, I thought basic tool. The most basic tool for the shop, in my mind, is going to be a good, heavy, sturdy bench. Heavy and sturdy is especially important if you're doing hand tool work. So I started out on this bench briefly behind me. Not really useful for hand tool work. It didn't take very long to find the limits of that bench. And then I built this bench, and this is like 2.5 inch thick laminated hard maple top. It weighs, guesstimating on other things that I picked up, a little more than a Volkswagen Beetle engine. It's heavy, it's sturdy, it could certainly be heavier. I've made a few adjustments to the original design to make it a little sturdier. And I think building this myself was really nice. I can't comment on the kind of benches you can get in a catalog. They're generally really expensive for a nice one. This one, I got the maple on a super sale. I didn't actually intend to make this bench out of maple, but it was too cheap to pass up. Still fairly expensive, probably about $500 in materials for the wood and the vices 8 years ago when I built it, or yeah, about 8 years ago when I built it. Building a bench myself means that I could also make it, tailor it to exactly what I want, or what I anticipated wanting, which is generally proved really useful. It's pretty standard vice. I've got, slanting sloped legs along one side. Tilt this down a little bit so you can see a little better, which is nice because then I have full surface to clamp to with no legs in the way. Probably the biggest, most specifically tailored to my process on this bench is going to be this tail vise. I can use bench dogs to clamp up my thicknessing setup. That way I don't have clamps in the way when I'm doing like tops and backs. When they would be super in the way in that process, I'd be having to avoid the clamp with the plane. And this way I have just completely clear workspace. And this vise also means that between these two screws, I can fit a whole guitar body, hold it gently, hold it firmly, and do a variety of different things with the body that would be difficult to do with other vices, other bench vices that I've seen. And also in the process of building the bench, it probably took me about 2 months because it was a real learning experience with the hand tools that I was using that I was still not super familiar with. Having that experience of making a bench is pretty valuable. It would probably, these days, cost a lot more in terms of wood. And if you're on a budget, you might check out Chris Schwartz's book, The Anarchist Workbench. I haven't read the book. It's on my to-read list for the year. I'm not affiliated with them. And like I said, I haven't read the book, but it's my understanding that it is detailing some of the history of workbenches and also how to build an affordable and sturdy bench with a focus on it being affordable and buildable without having a ton of money to throw into like exotic hardwoods or expensive hardwoods, and still have it be sturdy and all wood joint construction, like metal fasteners and things like that. So that might be worth checking out if you're on a budget, but you definitely, one way or another, want a big sturdy bench. Detailing a little of the less fun tools, but things that I still think can be important. Drill press. I have maybe the cheapest drill press you could buy. I wouldn't buy it if I could go back in time. I would probably have waited for a deal on a used drill press. But it works. It's taken a little bit of like rigging at times to keep it working. It's on my replace list, but it's not super high up on that list because it still does the job. You can get away without a drill press. You see jigs for like drilling tuner holes and that sort of thing, but then you're making a jig for everything that you need to do. The drill press is just, it's right there, it's accurate. Personally, I can't imagine not having a drill press if I didn't have electricity for some reason, or I wanted to go completely free of electricity, which I don't think I could do, for reasons that will be clear a little bit further down this list. I wouldn't want to do, I could definitely do it, but if I didn't have electricity, I would probably be rigging up some sort of, foot-powered drill press, because I just think the accuracy of a drill press is really, really nice. Hand drill, battery-powered, corded hand drill. I like corded because I can never remember to put batteries in and charge them. And it just, the batteries go bad, and then it's like as much money to buy a new set of batteries as it is to buy a new drill. It just seems really wasteful. So I like using a corded drill. The most important thing is going to be that the chuck jaws will zero out so you can fit the smallest bits in there, because there's going to be some things that you're going to want to do with very small drill bits, and some of them, the chuck jaws will have sort of a relief on them, and you won't be able to fit in really small bits into that drill. It's not totally essential. You could get away with a bit brace and whatever you call one of these things. And I use both of those time to time in the shop, but I think I get cleaner work with a hand drill, and it's a lot easier to find a hand drill than it is to find a good quality bit brace, I feel like. But I do have both of those things. I actually have 2 bit braces and 2 of the little hand crank things, although one of the hand crank things needs a little work. Yeah, hand drill. Not as essential. A rotary tool. I use a Dremel. I think they have a reputation for being kind of cheap, and they are kind of cheap. They're affordable. They're cheap, relatively. Fordham tools, I hear are a lot better. I've only really ever worked with them in the settings of like a museum I worked at, or in the time I spent at California College of the Arts. I don't know what kind of attachments there are that are available for a Fordham that are specific for instrument making, but Dremel has a ton of attachments specific for instrument making available, which is nice. I've definitely significantly reduced the amount of work I do with the Dremel, and it wouldn't be that hard to totally eliminate it, but it's handy sometimes. I have one, so keep it around, and I end up using it still for a lot of like rosette cuts and cutting out round sound holes. But I cut out an oval sound hole a few years ago just with a knife. It's not very difficult. It's not a hard thing to do without, in my opinion. In terms of like why it would be hard to get rid of electricity, lighting is essential. You might think you can get away with poor lighting, but then if you ever find yourself with good lighting and you go back, it's going to be obvious how detrimental it is to have bad lighting. I still have a lot of figuring out to do the lighting in this space. I've got lights maybe 20 feet up that don't really provide any useful light when I'm actually doing fine detail work. And I've got the sun, while the sun's out, which is nice, but it's all one directional. Ideally, I would want lower lights that are very bright overhead, and then the ability to have bright lights from multiple angles sort of around me, so that I can eliminate shadows as best as possible for detail work, and the raking light can be nice for judging finishes, and final sanding and looking for scratches and things. But yeah, good lighting is essential. Also essential is going to be stuff like humidity control. You could do without it, either accepting that your guitars are going to do weird things and have problems as the weather changes, which is true of a guitar in general. You know, if it gets super dry, it's probably going to have problems just because of the construction and the nature of wood. But you want to be doing stuff in a controlled environment, or else you want to be extremely patient and, you know, wait for just the right humidity environment to make glue ups and things like that. And then you're still going to be chancing things when it gets really wet in your shop or when it gets really dry. So I would say that having an ability to control the humidity and keep it in, you know, pretty tight range is very important. And as I was saying, in terms of, you know, this focusing on my process, I think things relating to hide glue are super important. And I think more people should be using hide glue because I think it's a really good glue for instrument making. So it's a lot easier to work with that if you have heat control, if you can, when you're doing glue ups, keep the heat in like the upper 60s, 70s, upper 70s. It makes glue ups a lot easier. I don't really like doing glue ups when it's below 65, which is a bit of a challenge in the shop that I'm in currently, although I have a little electric heater, and if I keep it on for several hours, I can generally get the temperature in here up into the upper 60s, and it's fine. I also have a heat gun, and I think that's super essential if you're going to do hide glue work. The heat gun will allow me to heat the specific parts that I'm going to glue together, and that extends open time on a glue up greatly. You can go from like frantically trying to get things together to being much more leisurely. If you've seen the video I do on binding glue up, that's sort of like an extreme use of heat to make a glue up, like pretty leisurely. Certainly more leisurely than my experience of doing a glue up with, you know, white glue, PVA glue, and trying to complete everything in the open time of that glue. So yeah, heat gun. I also, for that glue up, I also will use a pressure cooker. It's probably out of camera angle at this moment. To generate steam, that can also be useful along with like a clothes iron for taking joints apart if you have hide glue or other glues even. Which you might think of as being exclusively a repair thing, but there's going to be times when you might need to take something that you just glued apart to redo it. I had a back slip once and I had to take the whole back off, and the steam from the pressure cooker and the clothes iron did the trick, made it pretty easy. I also use the pressure cooker to wash jars with old glue in them, things like that. It's pretty useful. And really for any glue, I think, you know, brushes are really nice. And I've tried a lot of different brushes. I think sumi brushes, like Chinese and Japanese calligraphy brushes, are the best that I've tried. You can get them for pretty cheap, and with bamboo, no metal, so there's nothing to rust in the water when you leave it in the glue pot. And they hold a ton of liquid, so it's really nice to be able to spread glue on quickly without having to constantly be going back to the glue. And I find you can buy a glue pot specifically for hide glue from woodworking catalogs. They're generally really expensive. I've only ever used one, and that was at the school that I went to for woodworking. And it would heat the glue up really hot, like 190, 200 degrees, which is way hotter than you want to do. You want to heat it up at. I find that I have a fondue pot that I got at a thrift store for like $3. I've also seen people use baby bottle warmers, which I assume probably are a similar temperature range. The fondue pot's like 140 to 150 degrees when it's really warm in the summertime, it'll get above 150 and I gotta latch it and I'll either add water or unplug it to keep it from getting too hot. But it's generally just like right in the sweet spot temperature wise. And it's definitely, in my opinion, way better than $85 or $100, or I don't know how much they go for anymore, high glue pot from a catalog. So let's move on to some actual hand tools now. We'll start with saws that I think are really important for guitar making. Okay, so starting out on, what probably seems like more obvious hand tools that you're going to want for instrument making or for woodworking in general. We have a bunch of saws. So first, good Western style big rip saw, super useful. You're going to be making a bench, it's going to be incredibly important for ripping down boards. But for guitar making, I'm going to use that when I just want to cut something quick. If I have larger stock to rip, if I have wood that I've bought maybe at a lumberyard instead of a supply house, and I need to resaw into sheets. This is just like, I think Woodcraft sells these, I can't remember, but you can buy them on like online catalog or big woodworking store. It's basically just like a Japanese style crosscut saw. They sell them as like carpentry saws, and they're pretty cheap, and I would buy one that's pretty cheap. I use this for cutting up plywood, cutting up MDF, if I'm like rough cutting stuff for forms, things like that. They're cheap. This one I've had since 2014, the very beginning of 2014. It's cut up a lot of plywood, a lot of OSB, a lot of MDF, still pretty sharp, lots and lots and lots of 2x4s. And then I find that a Ryoba style saw is really nice for guitar work. Originally I had, the same kind of saw, Ryoba, that this is, which is just like the cheap one you buy from like a mass woodworking catalog. And it was alright. This I splurged on a couple of years ago when that one started to wander in cuts and get kind of slow. This was bought from Hita Tool in Berkeley, California, and is specifically made for hardwood, I guess. I don't really notice a lot of difference in the teeth, but I do notice that cutting it's really nice. I actually think it's better for joinery than the joinery specific saws I have, and so I use it for joinery. Yeah, these are super nice. Like, if you buy a nice one, this was still only like $100. It's got the same impulse hardened teeth. I expect it to last for several years, and then I'll spend, whatever amount it is to get a replacement blade, which I'm sure is probably like $50. And yeah, cross cut and rip saw all in one. And like I said, it's actually really, really accurate. So would highly recommend, from personal experience, splurging on the slightly pricier ones. So then I have also a flush cut saw, which sees some general flush cutting use. I also would use it sometimes to flush cut tops and backs before I do binding and riffling, after I've glued the plates on. It works. I'm going to do a detailed video about that process. Also sometimes use coping saw for that and for many other things in the shop. More often these days, I am using this, which again I think came from either Woodcraft or Rockler, something like that. It's basically like a drywall saw, and they advertise it as, for cutting circles and plywood and stuff like that. But it works really well for flush cutting, really for starting the flush cutting process for tops and backs in the way that I build. So yeah, that is a very specific saw to my process. And then fret saw is super useful, with some fine jeweler saw, or a jeweler saw, basically. I don't want to get confusing with the next saw. So a jeweler's saw, but sometimes they advertise them as fret saws with jeweler's blades. This you can use for inlay work and stuff like that. It also gets a lot of use in my shop for doing nuts and saddles because it cuts through bone really well. So yeah, the last saw I can think of that I see around my shop currently that is super useful is going to be a fret saw for cutting the fret slots. It's going to be curved so that it leaves a curve that will fit the fret wire very nicely, so you can press it in and it'll hold into the fretboard, which is super important. I bought this as a kit with one of those miter boxes that's set up with a pin system so that you can cut your different scale lengths off of like a jig with the miter box, and those are expensive. It's pretty easy. It's definitely not foolproof. I have cut slots in places where I didn't want to cut a slot before, but they are pretty easy, and it's seems worth it to me. You can also get a saw that will cut the fret slot the right size and forgo that and hand lay them out and cut them. Okay, so then we have clamps and things to hold things. Similar categories. Like I said, a bench with some vices that are thought out and work for the kind of work you're doing is super essential. It's also nice to have vices you can just put on the bench and take off the bench. An assortment of styles and varieties. There's a ton out there. I like this parrot vise. That's all right. I think the original one came with an adapter and made it a little bit more versatile for the stand, which doesn't come with these now. You might still be able to get them on eBay or something. I'm not sure. This is nice. A little vise can be useful for holding like nuts and saddles while you work on them. C-clamps, very useful. I mostly have these big, I think 6-inch ones, but it's nice to have smaller ones as well. Cam clamps come in different lengths, and you could make them yourself and make them whatever length you wanted. But really, really nice and useful. These bridge brace clamps, I basically only use these for, once in a while I'll use them for a brace glue up. It's generally easier to use the little screw ones that expand and contract inside the guitar. But these are really nice for gluing a brace or a bridge on. This style specifically I like. They're a little bit less stiff. So you can't put quite as much clamping force on, which isn't a problem. You should have your bridge should match the top very well. It shouldn't actually require a lot of clamping force, especially if you're using hide glue. But they also make other varieties that are stiffer, although I think these, because you don't have this screw out bit to go in the guitar and clear the braces, I find these to be more annoying to work with. So don't generally use these. And if you're using hand saws that you need to sharpen, having a saw vise to hold the saw, super useful. And last but not least in the clamp category, not the same category as C-clamps or cam clamps, things that kind of feel necessary, but still really useful. Go bar deck, you can use it to glue braces on, glue tops and backs on. Basically you just have these rods that are flexible, and you can stop them on one side and pin them to something down here, and they'll press it down. People that don't use go bar decks will use cam clamps and spool clamps and things like that to accomplish the same thing. I think as frustrating as the go bar deck is sometimes, it's really helpful, and I think it's nice. So I persist with using it, and it's really helpful. It's really nice. It's a good place to stash stuff that you're not using at the moment, but that you're going to use in the future, and then when you have to actually glue something up with it, to be like annoyed that it's covered and stuff. These are some of my experiences with it. I really like it. I like having a go bar deck. So yeah, then we have the measuring tools, and there's going to be a lot of measuring tools. I would love to acquire more, measuring tools and straight edges. Straight edges specifically, we've got really long ones. This, among other things, means that I can run the entire length of the neck all the way across the body when I'm checking like neck angle while I'm building a guitar, which is nice. So this is like a 4 foot. This is a 2 foot. I've got an attachment T-square for this, which is nice. Variety of squares, adjustable. Super good if I have, something that I want to register a lot of space on, but only extends a little ways. These can be nice, and also be able to do a 45. They're not maybe, the accuracy, I don't know, when you're dealing with small parts, this is, I think, fine, but they're not maybe as accurate as like a machinist square. Still really useful. Big square, useful. A little tiny square, useful. Wide variety of things. Small rulers, really good. This breaks my general rule, which is that I want my rulers to zero out so that I can rest them on a surface and measure exactly from the point it's resting at. But this one's double-sided, so it can be, metric and imperial. And this one has cork on the back, which is really nice because it doesn't slide around as much. So I keep it around. This one zeroes out too. It's a foot. It'd probably be really nice to have like an 18-inch ruler as well. And this has, I like to have everything have metric and imperial English measurements, because I bounce back and forth between the two, and I don't use one or the other exclusively. Kind of depends what I'm doing. Also, I've got this ruler that's specifically for laying out string spacing, which you don't need this for, but this is handy. I didn't pull them out while I was looking for this stuff, but I'm just thinking about it now, and that is calipers. This is a digital caliper. It's very useful for measuring small parts and getting them accurate. I've also got a larger caliper with like a deep throat that I can measure top specs, sides, thickness of wood. These are really nice for getting accurate measurements, and this setup is really nice to ensure that things are not moving while you're using it, because that will throw off your measurements, and you want repeatability so that you know how much you're thicknessing the woods too. Yeah, this is a supply house. This is nice. It's like stiff and it doesn't fluctuate while measuring things. The actual dial indicator on this is super cheap, which I suspected because it had a plastic piece that it was, holding it steady and helping the mechanism inside. It's just like a gear mechanism to hold steady. It broke maybe 4 years ago, just during the normal course of operation. It still works. It's a little bit more finicky now, but then I was doing a bunch of engine work last year, and I bought, okay dial indicators, and I opened one up just for fun, and opened this up, and this is way cheaper than that, and that is already a pretty cheap dial indicator that I bought for my engine work. So I'm almost inclined to say that if you can figure out a way to rig one of these up, you should do it, because these are really expensive from the supply houses, and I'm super unhappy with the quality of this dial indicator, and that is like the most important part of it. But this works. I use it. It seems to be repeatable, which is the thing that matters. But I don't know. Take it for what it's worth. This is super, super cheap. Or at least, I bought this 8 years ago, 9 years ago, and the dial indicators they were putting on them at that time were really cheap. Sliding bevel or multiple sliding bevels, really good. I have two. One of them is like a cheap Home Depot one that's got the tightening mechanism here. It doesn't work super well. It's either, too tight to really adjust, and then too tight to loosen, and a real pain, or it's going to slide around on me while I'm just handling it. These with a screw attachment on the bottom are a lot nicer, so that's a good tip. And then compasses, really nice for laying stuff out, really nice if you're making plans or designing a shape or something like that. I have a couple there, they're good, measuring layout stuff. So I think that's it for measuring and that sort of category of tools. Alright, so now we've got some more miscellaneous things and some stuff I haven't covered in previous topics, previous sections. Might have belonged better in there. That I'm specifically thinking of clothespins, which have been modified. I kind of flip them around in a funny way and wrap them with a rubber band so that they clamp tighter and straighter. These I'm going to use for lining. Like if you're doing kerfing, you could use these for kerfing. Super easy, super cheap. Just takes a while to rubber band them all. Bending iron, however you go style-wise for bending iron, still super important, necessary for bending sides, bending binding, bending thick purfling, stuff like that. I've got brass feeler gauges. This one's attached to a handle. I use this for gluing binding and applying glue to lining. So I can, slide the glue in between the pieces and then clamp it up. With this, the brass specifically is not going to cause any discoloring the way that steel, which I used to use, can. Still find lots of uses for steel feeler gauges that I have. A contour tool is going to be really useful for doing neck work, shaping a neck. I did a whole video on shaping a neck. These are super good to have. This one's just a cheap one. You get at Ace with the little pins. Works great. Some little pliers and nips for holding things are really useful. Also, tweezers or hemostats. Sometimes you're going to end up holding very tiny things, like you need to patch a little tiny spot in purfling. The hardest part of that whole operation is holding the little tiny piece of wood that you need to put in, like inlay in to fix the thing that you need to fix. So having a variety of things that can hold small objects is really helpful. Of course, fretting tools, bigger end nips. Supply houses for guitar making things sell them. They were great. If you're going to do stainless steel frets, you need to upgrade to more expensive end nips, or you'll destroy the cheaper ones. I would probably just buy the ones from the supply houses, because otherwise you're just going to like hardware stores and trying to figure out what's like a quality one versus what's not. And tools generally are like degrading in quality at most hardware stores, so it's just better to buy from the people that are selling you something that they know works, in my opinion, in that realm. I've got a fretting hammer. It's got a brass end, plastic side that's sometimes useful, and it's like a dead blow. It's got sand in it. Super good for doing fretting. Could make a fretting hammer too. That wouldn't be that difficult. Also good to have a normal hammer. I've got a little tiny kid's hammer for knocking in pins for thicknessing tops, backs and sides, and so many other things. It's not really a hammer, but a veneer hammer is going to be super useful for doing veneer work. If you Want to make finding a perf one. I don't know where mine went, so maybe, no, I don't know where mine went. But linear hammer's not super difficult to make, and they are super useful. Variety of sanding blocks. I just like making my own instead of using those rubber 3M sanding blocks. You know, the variety of sizes, variety of surfaces. This is flat and just wood, cork, felt, and a little spruce sanding block with some different sides that I can use. It's good to have a variety of shapes and sizes for sanding blocks to sand a variety of things. Drill bits, got really nice woodworking, wood specific drill bits with the cutters on the outside and a pin to mark. Very accurate, very useful, very expensive as well. So then I also, have a variety of cheap drill bits just buy at the hardware store if there's something that I need to do that doesn't need to be as nice, or the occasional time when I need to drill metal. For really tiny drill bits, I've been using this Dremel set. They're pretty cheap, and it goes all the way down to 1/32 of an inch. And the tiny bits can be super useful at times. So you got reamers, something I also just bought at the supply house. This one is going to be for like headstock holes for, I think this is actually specifically tapered for like tuning pegs. But if you have press fit, like old vintage style tuners with a press fit top, this works really well for reaming out the hole to just exactly fit that press fit top. So it's secure, but you're not going to split the headstock. And then this is for bridge pins. I think it's a 5-degree taper. You can get tapers from, probably cheaper sources, but you need to know like the size requirements and the taper requirement and everything else. And I like these tapers, they worked well, so probably worth just buying from a supply house. Assortments of files, so many files, round files, chainsaw files, 3-corner files. You're going to want fretting files. There's the rounded fretting files, which is what I use. There's diamond fretting files, which I don't use them like as much. They also sell safety files. I can't remember the exact name that like LMI uses or whatever. But it's just like a 3-corner file that's had the teeth ground off on the edges, so you could just buy a 3-corner file and make it into that. Those are useful. The 3-corner files for sharpening saws are super useful. Bastard files, useful for a variety of things. Stumax sells these things for like nuts and saddles, and it's like 4 different grades of coarseness. The coarsest is like almost a rasp, it's still coarse. And these are super nice for doing fast nut work, shaping nuts, shaping saddles, they work well. Rasps, good for neck work, got a variety. These, I don't think that you can buy these anymore on LMI, but they're like hand-cut rasps, they work really well. Definitely worth the hand-cut, in my opinion, is worth the extra money. Riffler rasps, riffler files can be really nice for more, contour work. Yeah, for saddles, this countersink bit is really nice. One of the ones that you like actually bolt onto a drill bit. You can bolt onto the drill bit. It's the same size as the holes you drilled in for the string pegs and for the bridge pins, and that can guide it. It's real nice, better than the ones that don't have the drill bit guide, in my opinion. trying to think if there's any other miscellaneous stuff. You know, a lot of it is just like ingenuity and problem solving as you go as well. There's countless things that I use for tools in here, some of which are just like a piece of wood that's shaped a certain way that I can use for a certain thing. You know, or making something up for one thing, and then, you know, maybe I'll use it again in a couple of years when I encounter that again. So it's really, there's just like a limitless amount of miscellaneous tools that you're gonna want. Okay, so we have one more like miscellaneous thing that I thought of that is super helpful, maybe not totally essential, but really helpful, and that is gonna be radius dishes. Lots of people currently radius their back and their top to different radiuses, so the two that you would want for that would be good. It helps to add strength to the top and the back. Even if you do a totally flat top, it's still pretty common to do a radius back. And you could get away with doing this without a radius dish. The guitar that I'm currently working on with the compound top, I did the upper bow braces on that by hand. Because they're compound radius, it would be impossible really to do with a radius dish. And that wasn't too bad. It would be a little more time consuming maybe, and I think doing the rims of a spherical radius would be maybe challenging, but certainly doable without a radius dish. And there's other radiuses, some people don't use spherical radiuses, but something to do that if you're going to use a radius is very helpful. So then I think it's time to move on to sort of the last category, which is I think what people tend to think of when you think hand tool woodworking, the tools that are involved, and that's going to be like blades, things that we sharpen. So I think it makes the most sense maybe to start with the things that sort of straddle two categories. So I'm thinking like marking gauges. Marking gauge is super nice. I would opt pretty much always for one with a blade, as opposed to the style with like a sharpened pin. The blade is going to cut the wood, and you'll end up with like nice clean lines, and it'll cut the grain instead of tearing it like the pin would. And a marking gauge is really pretty similar to a Grammel, which is another tool that I think is super helpful. A Grammel is kind of like a specialized marking gauge, and the specialization allows it to do a lot more. I can, for instance, cut binding channels, cut purfling channels with a Grammel, predominantly with a Grammel, and the aid of a few other tools. I think these are super useful to have. I guess if I was on a real tight budget, I might just get a Grammel and not get a marking gauge, and then try and use the Grammel for what I need. But they do have kind of a limited length generally. So for some operations it is nice to have a longer length. Maybe less so in guitar building, but I do still think I use it for guitar related things. And relating to that, getting a little bit more towards wood removal and a little bit away from layout, but still important layout tools would be to have some good knives. I prefer to have a single bevel or a single-sided knife. This has two bevels on it, but they're both on the same side, and it's got a nice flat back. These are flat backed with a single bevel, and I really like these, but I think it's really helpful to have the left and the right for the kind of work that I do with them. These are really nice. You know, having that flat back is really nice, because if you're referencing something off a straight edge and you need to mark a line, just like, you know, your marking gauge or your Grammel, using it for that, the knife edge is going to allow you to get a very precise reference line. Even with like a super fine pointed pencil, it's still not going to be as precise as being able to register off of a knife line, and the knife line can actually function as your like completed edge if you're careful about it. So if I was gonna start out, I actually started out with a lot of double beveled knives, and I still have them, I still use them sometimes, but I would say starting out, if I was on a tight budget, a marking knife like this is going to do most anything you need to do marking wise. Sometimes this will get in the way, the handle, and these are nice when that happens. But generally speaking, this works super well. I also use it for carving, various wood removal tasks that are a little bit finer than I want to use like chisels on. And these are pretty affordable, and they sharpen quick. They're very sharp. Another benefit of the single bevel is that it can be very, very sharp, just like a chisel. So then let's talk about chisels. There's so many different kinds of chisels for very specific functions, and you'll probably collect more as you go. But generally speaking, starting out, a good set of like bench chisels, bevel edge bench chisels, is going to work really well for almost everything you need to do. They're kind of utilitarian, multi-purpose sorts of things. I would say, within reason, buy the best chisels you can, but chisels can be extremely expensive, and there's not really a big reason when you're starting out to go crazy, especially if you're on a budget. I'm using these, I have been basically my entire woodworking career. Blue handle Irwin Marples chisels. They were recommended to me when I was in woodworking school as being like very affordable but still quality chisels. I don't really have any significant complaints about them. I like them, and I don't remember exactly how much the set I have cost. I have everything between 1/8 and 1 1/4 inch, so it's like 8 chisels. I would say the set of those 8 chisels probably cost not very much more than a single chisel that I bought in Berkeley at Heated Tool cost. This is a really nice chisel, but I could never afford to have bought 8 of these, especially when I was starting out. I don't think I would have really needed to. I only bought this specifically to do headstock, like violin style purfling, and I needed a really thin, really narrow chisel. So this is 1.5 millimeter. When you're getting chisels, if you're like me and you kind of bounce between imperial and metric, it maybe doesn't matter so much, especially doing guitar work, whether you have imperial or metric chisels. If you're really strictly one or the other system of measurements, then I would probably buy chisels in that system of measurement, especially if you think you might venture into like furniture making or something like that, where it's, a lot of things are referenced off the size of the chisel. It'll just make all of your measurements easier. So yeah, chisels. Next we move on to planes. This is another thing where you can just kind of collect endless supply of planes for specific purposes. Starting out, this isn't exactly what I started out with, but I think for a recommendation it's like a good place to start. And that would be that you're going to want like a nice block plane, very handy for smaller stuff. You're going to want a jointing plane. It's going to come in handy for a lot of things. Specifically, I can think of when you're jointing the top and the back to join the plates, the book match plates. It's really essential that that be exact, and a jointing plane can be really helpful in that process. And thinking about that, like a 6 or a 7 plane is really good. A 7 maybe is preferable. A 6 is what I use. It works really well. This plane, I kind of got with the impression that I would be able to do jointing with this. But what I didn't realize would be such a problem is that it basically has the very little square reference edge on the sides of the plane. So I really can't join with this, like backs and tops, and I just end up using this all the time. But this has got a tooth blade that I have 3 blades for this, and one of them is a tooth blade, and that is super important in my mind for doing difficult grain or for working backs and sides and tops, where you have, because of the book match, grain that's maybe moving in 2 directions, and it can be hard to work accurately without a tooth blade. Talk a little bit about that in another video that I made a while back. Working with that, a scraper plane is super helpful. not essential, but it's easier, you know, for working large things to use the scraper plane than it is to use a scraper over the whole thing. And then I would say a 4-plane or something in the middle size-wise is going to be really helpful. Basically, if you can get a tooth blade for anything that you have outside of maybe the scraper, I know you can get tooth scrapers, but I don't necessarily know if I see the reason unless you're working extremely difficult wood. But a tooth plane for anything is always a plus if you're going to be thicknessing things solely with hand tools, because it can remove a lot of difficulty and a lot of, you know, oops, I just tore that piece out, but it's already as thick as I want it, and I don't want to take it down any further, which can be a really, you know, sad moment. And then it's nice to have like a little thumb plane. There's still lots of different sizes of these, and it could be nice to have multiple sizes. I personally have, you know, always found the one little thumb plane I have to be adequate. This is really nice for working braces. I use it to clean up like the lining. When I've glued the lining and I need to bring that down to size and do like some rough radiusing of the sides, you know, before I use the radius dish. So I think these are super useful. And then we got spoke shaves. These are great. Neck carving, a variety of other things, but neck carving, these are really great. It's nice to have a flat bottomed one, and you know, the curved bottom one in my shop gets a lot more use, but they're both really nice to have. If possible, it's good to get this sort of screw system of adjustment that, you know, you have 2 screws that go in and out to adjust the blade height. The single screw setup, it works, but it's a lot more finicky to get the blade just where you want it, and it takes a lot longer. Yeah, spoke shaves in my shop at least are pretty indispensable. And then, you know, the last thing I would say is scrapers. I have a video on sharpening scrapers, and probably most essential for me is to have 2 rectangular scrapers. I don't think it would really matter the size-wise. You know, I bought these as a pack, and you get one kind of wide one and one more narrow one. But what I actually consider the difference between these two is that this one I sharpen with a file, and it's for non-final work. And this one I sharpen with a stone, and it is for the final surface of the backs and sides of my guitars. It's a lot faster than sanding, and it creates a really nice surface for finishing. And both of these get a variety of other uses in the shop. But yeah, these are good. Having 2 so that you don't have to jump back and forth between sharpening methods is good. And then, you know, they sell contoured scrapers. I bought these. I thought I would use them a lot more than I actually do, but they do come in handy sometimes. So they can be nice to have. And I think that's pretty much it. This is clearly not every possible tool that you might need, but this would be a pretty good basic setup. And of course, some of the fun of building guitars and doing hand tool woodworking is collecting tools. And it's hard to know exactly what tools you're going to want until you start in and work out a process for yourself that feels good, and see the areas that you need tools. You need to like increase your tooling in, and you know, the specific tools that are going to work for what you want to do. But I think this would get you pretty far in like a basic shop setup. So yeah, I hope the video has been helpful and interesting today, and I want to thank you for watching. If you like the video, please hit the like button. If you're not already subscribed, please consider subscribing to my channel. I'll be posting more videos about guitar making and hand tool woodworking in the future. And yeah, if you like and subscribe, it helps me to reach a wider audience, and that helps me to make more videos, and that's sort of a win-win for everybody. So yeah, thank you again for watching, and I hope to see you next time.